Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Whenever there's a human corpse, you can always bet that there's going to be plenty of flies buzzing about, and the death of Charlie Kirk has been no different. There seems to be an informal contest among the white right, which includes their black bootlicks, to try to see which one of them can position themselves correctly after he got killed. For them, this isn't some time for reflection, it's a time to see who can set themselves up to benefit from this. As Charlie Kirk himself said, it's 100% necessary to politicize killings. And let's not kid ourselves, when it comes to the beneficiaries of white privilege, there's no honor among thieves. It's every racist for himself, ultimately. So you have all these people who are suddenly tripping over their shoelaces to see who can heap the most insincere and undeserved praise on this guy. They've given him more gushing affection in the last 3 days than they did in the last 3 years. And that praise has become more and more ridiculous and over the top. Can you believe that there were actually individuals who were saying that this guy, we think that he could have gone into politics? No, he couldn't. Oh, he could have become president. That wasn't going to happen. I know that after Donald Trump got elected, every two-bit politician in America, especially the ones on the right who have the most brass and the least brains, think that they can become president too, because after all, if a grotesque walking Cheeto can do it, then anybody can, right? But the reality is Donald Trump is a unique American political anomaly. He's a one-off. Charlie Kirk doesn't have presidential timber any more than Bill O'Reilly does. In fact, about the most that Charlie Kirk could probably get would be on some city council in some red state sewer somewhere. If he had thrown his Burger King crown in the ring, he would have wound up being humiliated because he has far more in common with the likes of Ron DeSantis than he does Donald Trump. There's a reason why all of these right-wing blowhards that you see on the internet or on TV don't go into politics. About the closest to it that there's been has been Steve Bannon. He's been smart enough to stick to his podcast and the occasional interview and speaking engagement where he goes and tries to rile up the white right at home and abroad. In these pathetic and desperate attempts that the white right's been making to try to make Charlie Kirk seem like he was important somehow, all they've actually done is to show how little substance the white right has. Look at who they compare him to. They compare him to the likes of MLK and JFK. Why not compare him to, say, Ronald Reagan? Or Barry Goldwater, a ranting racist who opposed the Civil Rights Act and hates anything having to do with black people? Yeah, that definitely describes Barry Goldwater and Charlie Kirk. See, Charlie Kirk was just an online racist. He put together a network of other like-minded bigots, but all of it was astroturf. He wasn't some transformational anything. He was an invention of white dark money. He was their puppet. The same way that Bill O'Reilly became a thing because people like Rupert Murdoch put the battery in his back, and as soon as he got deposed, in comes Tucker Carlson, and when Tucker Carlson got sent packing, here's Jesse Waters. The same thing goes for Charlie Kirk. He's a replaceable tool. And I'm sure that decent people are hoping that this is going to be the beginning of the end of that putrid operation that he was running. Just keep in mind, what we see now is an attempt by his former backers to maintain the political operation that he was the front racist for, and to see if they can get a new flunky to lead the brain-dead morons who were dumb enough to follow that guy. After all, a group of fools that large will be hard to find. And speaking of fools, that brings us to Candace Owens. She's been doing the most for the last few days to basically try to make herself out to be the bootlick of bootlicks for old Massa Charlie. See what I did there? Personally, I'm surprised that Candace Owens hasn't popped up somewhere and shoved Charlie Kirk's widow aside so that she can throw herself over the casket. She wants to try to inherit his following. That's what she's trying to do. And she wants to try to go ahead and use Charlie Kirk's memory, such as it is, for her own benefit. And she's not alone. There's been a lot of individuals the last few days who have been trying to position themselves the same way for the exact same reason, including people like Benjamin Netanyahu, who, from reports, Charlie Kirk was basically not that warm towards at the end of his life. But it bears mentioning that Massa Charlie didn't think highly of black women at all. And that includes Candace Owens. So how perversely ironic that Candace Owens is sitting here trying to make herself out to seem as if Charlie Kirk was okay in her book, when the reality is he had contempt for her just like he had contempt for every other black person. While she's busy trying to remind people of what Charlie Kirk's detractors were saying about him prior to his death, she ought to look at what Charlie Kirk was saying about black people when he was alive. The only way that you can lionize and praise someone like him is to completely and thoroughly overlook the mountain of nonstop racism and violence and bigotry that he was spewing since he came on the scene. And when you consider the big money in the shadows that was funding Charlie Kirk, you also understand why there's been these wealthy sports franchise owners who couldn't wait to force the public to endure tributes to this guy. Charlie Kirk's entire job was to deliver the kind of openly racist nonsense that these rich white moguls can't. He did their dirty work. You see, in order for these rich white men in the NFL and Major League Baseball and elsewhere to get their money, they got to have black people who are actually going to be working to make them that money. Charlie Kirk didn't have that vulnerability. And that's the kind of thing that made these guys envious. They're looking and going, well, we're going to support him every other way that we can. And you know what? This is good in that a lot of these racist and bigots and these anti-black pukes, they're feeling emboldened to go on the record. This is something that they weren't doing even during the BLM protest, even during the Take a Knee protest, even during Donald Trump's rise to power. But now what's happening is with Trump's second term, these people are starting to feel like, well, hell, we might as well go ahead and let it all hang out. Let people know what we think. This may be the last chance we ever get to do so. And this is good because we can see these scumbags. Everyone's being forced or otherwise compelled to go on the record. That's something that wouldn't have happened if Kamala Harris had become president. If you're going to crush white supremacy, you're going to need to know who it is you need to crush. The only way the likes of Candance Owens can pretend to praise someone like Charlie Kirk is to just wholesale ignore everything that he said. And that's a lot. When she got called out for the fact that Charlie Kirk said that black women are intellectually inferior to white men, she couldn't even defend the guy, and she didn't even try. She was more willing to take on Bill Ackman, a billionaire oligarch, than she was people online who were reminding her what Charlie Kirk had said about black women. But then again, Candace Owens doesn't consider herself black. She considers herself to be, well, something else. The entire reason that that woman is so absurdly masculine and aggressive is because that's who she wants to be. She wants to be one of the wealthy white men who she's had to depend on for every crumb of her daily bread and who she's worked most of her adult life to try to impress. That's the reason why she acts like she does and talks the way that she does. It's so manly because that's who and what she wants to be. And then you look at the fact that this woman can't even stick up for herself when it matters. This is the cost of being a bootlick. This is why they have no credibility, and it's the price you have to pay to get on white power's payroll. You've got to abandon all self-respect, which in Owens' case isn't much of a problem because she never had any to begin with. What we're seeing from the white right is their predictable and feculent attempts to basically jockey for position by disqualifying everybody else. See, this is something that's very, very common in Europe, back when they had more monarchies. One of the things that would routinely happen, especially after the king or queen would die, is that the members of the royal family, they would try to bastardize each other. They would try to find a way to disqualify each other from being in the line of succession. This happened a hell of a lot over there, and if you weren't able to necessarily disqualify somebody from being in line for the crown, then you could always kill them. That way you definitely didn't have to worry about them later. But this is what we're seeing from the white right and even their black minions going on right now. They're basically all saying, no, Charlie Kirk, I loved him more than you did, or Charlie Kirk liked me more than he liked you. That's what you're seeing right now. They're sitting there pointing fingers at each other and saying, oh, don't try to act as if you were one of his buddies. He couldn't even stand you. That's what's going on. And the reason that they're doing it is they're auditioning for a job. And what's the job? Heir apparent to the audience and the money that Charlie Kirk was getting for his little organization. That's what they're hoping to do. That's what they're all trying to do. As far as they're concerned, there's an enormous windfall of money and power that they could possibly snatch up for grabs if they can position themselves correctly. But because there's so many other people on the white right who have the exact same idea, because mediocre minds think alike, they're all out here trying to basically disqualify each other and say you were a nothing and a nobody, he didn't even like you, etc., etc. It reminds me of a weird little movie. I think it was supposed to be a satire that I saw some clips of on YouTube called The Death of Stalin. And that's definitely the right comparison to be made here. Now, according to the people who made that movie, there were a number of scenes in it, especially the ridiculous ones, that actually were historically accurate. Perhaps exaggerated a bit, but for the most part historically accurate because of how strange people had to act in order to keep Joseph Stalin from having them executed. So after Stalin dropped dead, which may or may not have been the result of his inner circle poisoning him, what happened was these guys then decided that they were going to start brawling amongst themselves to see who was going to be Stalin's successor. And it wasn't just the political insiders who had been part of the party hierarchy. You even had Stalin's own little brats who got involved. So I'm keeping an eye on Charlie Kirk's widow and seeing whether or not she's going to start denouncing people eventually. Maybe she might think to herself that, hey, Charlie's gone, but now she's going to be the queen who takes over the, kingdom. There was one very strange scene in the movie where Steve Buscemi, who was playing the part of Nikita Khrushchev, decided that at Stalin's funeral, they were all going to be standing around the casket, but that they would try to position themselves in a way that they would try to be as prominent as possible because, hey, this is the perfect opportunity to set yourself up to be the successor to Joseph Stalin. But that's what happened after that tyrant dropped dead. You had a lot of people who basically were just trying to figure out how do we convince people that we loved him more than everybody else did because we think that we can inherit his following and whatever supporters that he had, and then we're going to have the money and the power, and we're going to be screwing people over just like he did. That's what all of this totally phony adulation that these white right-wing nuts and their Negro bootlicks are doing, that's what it reminds me of. It's all theater, it's all phony, and if they were totally honest, they'd all admit that they were just glad that this guy got killed because now it gives them a chance, they think, to climb the political ladder for themselves over his dead body. Well, it just goes to show the times may change, but the corrupt and the vicious don't. The lessons that people better take away from all this is that this is what happens when you normalize the practice of being deliberately callous and making people's deaths into nothing more than opportunities to politicize it for personal profit. When you spend all of your time and energy making it normal to dehumanize people, sooner or later that's gonna come back to you. Charlie Kirk himself bragged about how the death of that Ukrainian woman was nothing more than a chance to get some political support for the white right's own unpopular and asinine policies. You see, had that white woman been black, Charlie Kirk would never have talked about her, because they didn't care. And now he is slowly falling prey to the exact same fate. The same way when he was talking about school shootings and people being killed by firearms and saying, well, that's just the cost that has to be paid for the Second Amendment. In his mind, what he was thinking was, well, that's never actually going to be me. After all, I've got myself some little rent-a-thugs who I like to surround myself with. And on top of that, I'm pretty careful. Well, so is Abraham Lincoln, JFK, and Ronald Reagan. And all of those guys got shot. 2 of them got killed. Being careful simply isn't enough. It matters what kind of a social environment that you're giving rise to. But when you're part of the dominant society, you start to take on this air of invincibility and immortality, as if the rules don't apply. Well, just because this society gives a certain demographic racial immunity from law doesn't mean that it has the power to ward off any and all bad things from happening. That's the reason why you got to be careful with what you do and what you say. And speaking of people who need to be more careful, these would-be usurpers that we've been seeing the last few days who have been doing everything that they can to try to heap praise on Charlie Kirk in the hopes of getting the attention of his former followers, these would-be usurpers will ultimately fail. You see, the problem with the Candace Owens and such that they fail to understand is they didn't create the money machine that funded and fueled Charlie Kirk's racist little fiefdom. So they don't have the power to seize it. They don't have the power to take it. Yes, Candace Owens has been very lucky in that she managed to go ahead and break away from Ben Shapiro's operation, and she's started up her own little cult of personality, which in her case is doubly impressive because she doesn't have any personality to begin with. But the problem for her happens to be, at the end of the day, it's one thing to go ahead and start a podcast and corral a certain number of the white right, but being able to walk into an operation that was being funded by mega millionaires and billionaires and get those people to sway over to you, and apparently you're going to walk in and take those folks away, that's going to be a hell of a lot higher mountain to climb. The oligarchs who bankrolled TPUSA, they will attempt to prop up a new tool to lead it, Same way that you had people who decided that Ralph Reed was going to be made into a thing because, well, the Christian right needed him to. Will this person have the ability to grow the following that Charlie Kirk and his billionaire backers were able to amass? Well, we'll see, but truth be told, a lot of these guys, they're basically sock puppets anyway. Long as they get out there and talk maximum trash about black people, that'll be enough for the empty-headed maggots who like them to follow slavishly behind them. This time, however, I'm willing to bet that whoever these oligarchs choose to succeed Charlie Kirk, it's going to be somebody who won't go casting aspersions on Israel, and whether or not they deserve the billions of dollars that they're getting, and whether or not Iran should be attacked. They're going to find somebody who will go ahead and just say yes to whatever they're told. And when that happens, the likes of Candace Owens will find themselves on the outside of even TPUSA. They'll be finding themselves closed out, and they'll be whining and complaining and saying things just ain't the same since Charlie Kirk got murked. But the reality happens to be this is exactly what it is, exactly what it's always been. A bunch of shills, bootlicks, suck-ups, and fools who have called themselves sniffing for whatever dollar they can get from white dark money. Attacking black people is their ticket to ride, but that doesn't mean that the train's going to meet its destination. And even if it does, well, as we've seen this week, even if you're on that train, there's no guarantee you'll make it to the end. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Gwendolyn Langston, Sean, Shamela Martin, Gavin Andrade, and DPB79. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.